Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Kaplan Test Prep's Medical School Admissions Consulting event tonight, focusing on interviews, insider tips. My name is Dr. Matt Alvin. I'm a current radiology resident at the Johns Hopkins Hospital, and I'm also a Kaplan admissions consultant. Back in the day, which feels so long ago, when I was in all of your guys' shoes, I was an applicant, and I was in this position now where it was summertime and I was checking my email, eagerly waiting for those interviews. And unfortunately, the first time that I applied to medical school, I got rejected. But for me, the journey wasn't over, and I turned to Kaplan for help. And it was because of Kaplan that the following year, I got into medical school, to a school that I didn't think I could really ever get in during the first time. And here I am today. And so, that hopefully shows you that, since then that I've been with Kaplan helping people like all of you to make your dreams a reality and to, build your success story. That's why we're here tonight. I'm joined tonight by two amazing people who are also Kaplan admissions consultants, Maria Loftus and Laura Christensen. Both have an excellent background in both the interviewing and secondary application process. Tonight's focus is all about the interviews, and we have a lot of great stuff to chat about. Before we jump into it, just a few things. So we have a lot of great teaching assistants in the background here tonight who are helping us kind of run this session. Please, at any point during the session, give us your questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible. There is a dedicated question and answer session at the end of tonight's session, but all throughout the presentation, we're going to try to integrate in your questions just to make it, useful to you guys on the moment. It's a moderated chat, so, not all the questions that you ask, are going to necessarily go through. So, maybe private versus public. So, just keep that in mind, that you can ask whatever you want. It's a safe and open environment here, and, we're just excited to get started. So, with that said, I'd like to introduce Maria Loftus, who's going to start us off tonight with the presentation. Maria.
Thank you very much, Matt, and to all of you, welcome. We are so happy to have you here tonight. As Matt said, my name is Maria Loftus. I am the former Assistant Dean of Recruitment and Admissions at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine. I was there for about 20 years. During my tenure, I had the wonderful opportunity of representing the Western medical schools, that's Colorado West, to the Association of American Medical Colleges Standing Committee on Admissions. And after serving as a committee member for several years, I then chaired the committee. Now, what was really great about this committee is, one, we promulgated best practices in admissions. And then we got to go out and train admissions committees across the country in these best practices. And that allowed all of us the opportunity to peek behind the curtain at what other schools do. And it was always such a surprise to me to realize the variation, the variability from school to school to school in terms of how we ran the logistics of the admissions process, but also what it is that we thought was important. And the reason there is such variability is because admissions practices, admissions, the rules, how much, what they're going to look at and how much they're going to weigh it, is promulgated by the faculty at that medical school, and specifically the faculty that are on the admissions committee. And since that committee changes over from year to year, a certain percentage, it also means that what the school thinks is important and the weight they're going to give it can change from year to year. Well, a few months ago, I retired from the university, and now I get to do what I really enjoy doing, which is helping you put forth your best application and get into medical school. That is something I really, truly enjoy, and I think I speak for all of my fellow admissions consultants when I say that. And so just know that wherever you are in the process, if you need a coach, we're here to help, and we really enjoy doing that. So with that said, let's get started with tonight's presentation. As Matt said, we're going to be talking about the interview process, which for many of you is right around the corner now. And the agenda tonight, first we're going to do an overview of the interview process, what you can do to prepare, what you should expect, give you some live examples of interviewing questions, and then we'll be taking the question and answer period. So as Matt said, if you've got questions, be shooting them to us. And if it flows right into where we are in the presentation, we'll get those questions and we will be answering them on the fly. Other questions will hold till the end of our presentation. Let's talk about how important the interview is. It is so important because it is the last thing that is being considered. And for all of you who get that invitation for an interview, you know that for that medical school, you are acceptable on paper, because if there was anything that would preclude your being admitted, you wouldn't be invited for the interview. So that means, again, that the interview becomes the most important aspect of the application for those people who are going through the interview. It will make or break you depending upon whether you are successful in presenting yourself in the light that you want to, or if you left some opportunities on the table. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, definitely. And, just to pique everybody's interest here, remember that you guys are getting lots of perspectives tonight. Maria, I consider to be the perspective of, she's the one who's looking at the applications, and Laura as well. They're the ones who looked at my secondary and made the decision of, whether or not to say, no, we don't want that Matt character, or, they said, well, we can grant him an interview. But then from my perspective, remember, I was an applicant. And so just to give you perspective, I applied to 23 schools, and of those 23, I got 12 interviews. So, and of those 12 interviews, I certainly didn't get accepted at all of them, but, getting 12 interviews and was a dream come true for me. And I considered myself a pretty good applicant. But even with that, the 12 interviews, I knew at that point, okay, I got my foot in the door. Great. Now what's the next step? And so that's what, we're here tonight to help you all prepare for, which is that next step. Now, the one-on-one sessions that we can have with you all is working on, specifically your answers to the interview questions themselves. So for instance, yesterday I did a mock interview session with one of my students who, she told me that a new thing for her is that part of the interview process is a standardized patient encounter, which was totally new from, when I was the one who was, on the other side, being interviewed. And so being able to prepare for things like that, in addition to the conventional interview, the MMI format, there's just a lot of stuff to cover. And it is of vital importance. I tell all of my students that when you get that foot in the door and you get that interview, everything else then goes to you, how you do at that interview. And that's why, we're spending tonight focusing on it to try and get you guys as ready as possible. So let me turn it over to Laura now to introduce her for the first time. So again, Laura Christensen, another great Kaplan admissions consultant, lots of background and experience reviewing secondary applications, and has a lot of good insight on the MMI interview process as well. So Laura, please take over.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Christensen, and I am another admissions consultant here with Kaplan. What makes me a little unique compared to Matt and Maria, I have never taken the MCAT. I am not a doctor, and I do not work for a specific university. However, I am what is known as a community member who is part of the admissions team. I do secondary screenings. Our community members also participate in the MMI interview process. So that's one thing to kind of think about: who is actually reading your application, or who are you going to be meeting with when you go to the interview? Your interview is about putting the best you out there. This is your chance to see if this school is a good fit for you, and this school is for sure checking you out to see if you are a good fit for them. So learning how to build a rapport with a variety of people, especially if your interview process involves the MMI, where you're going to go through stations and meet several different people who may be physicians, may be faculty from the college, but may also be community members or current med students. So it's an interesting process, and that's one thing to really think about as you prepare. And what Matt and Marie have said, you get to that interview and you are on paper what the school's looking for. So now you need to show that in person, you are also a good fit for that school. So doing your research, being ready to know exactly what that school is all about and how you can present yourself to them, building that rapport. Building the rapport is definitely a skill that we want to help you work on, because I know sometimes it's a little scary to try and put yourself out there and create an immediate connection with a stranger. So that's something that you can definitely practice and something that we want to help you with, because that is what makes the interview that much more important. All right, I am going to turn it back over to Maria, and she wants to talk a little bit more about being invited for the interview.
So you've just gotten that golden invitation to go to a medical school for the interview. A couple of things to think about. First of all, are there other schools that you've applied to in that general region? Because you should let that school know, the other school, know that you're coming, and ask if it's possible for you to interview at the same time. And just explain that you are flying in from out of state, and would it be possible? Most medical schools, if they know that they're going to want to interview you eventually, try to be accommodating to those kinds of requests, because we know that it's expensive and we really do try to work with applicants. But obviously, the more time you can give us in advance, the better. And obviously, if it's a school that you can drive to in your neighborhood, then they're not going to be as sympathetic to those kinds of requests. But if, in all sincerity, you are making a special trip somewhere and you're trying to group your interviews together, just let the other schools know. And as I said, they will absolutely try to accommodate those. If you have to reschedule an interview, which is also entirely possible that that's going to happen, some medical schools will ask you ahead of time to give date preferences or days of the week preferences so they can try to accommodate your schedule. But other medical schools, you're just going to simply get an email or an invitation by snail mail saying, please come for an interview on this date. And you may already have another interview scheduled on that date. Or you may still be in university and you might have a final exam scheduled that day. Something that prevents you from attending the interview. Just as quickly as possible, let the school know that you need to make a change. And again, they will be as accommodating as they can be. It's hard for me to imagine a situation in which you would want to cancel an interview, with the possible exception that you've decided you don't want to go to that medical school. Then certainly I can understand canceling. But if you have not received an acceptance to your first choice school, then you should try to take advantage of every interview opportunity that you can, because it's your opportunity to see that school up close. And you may discover that a school that you had not thought that you would necessarily pick as your first choice becomes your first choice on the basis of that interview and spending the day with the school. Now, the other thing to do, and I've kind of alluded to this throughout, but certainly when you get your invitation for the interview, you do want to acknowledge that invitation. From the very beginning, every interaction that you have with the medical school, beginning with that invitation, it counts. And so you want to act like any good guest. You want to acknowledge that you have received the invitation and that you plan to attend, or if you need to reschedule or you're canceling, to do that also in a timely manner so that it reflects well upon you. And in terms of how many interviews to attend, everyone you can afford to go to up until the time you have gotten the acceptance to the school of your choice. And that's the only time that you should stop. Now I'm going to turn it over to Matt to see what he has to say from having gone through this experience himself.
So the first thing is in the, the era of having no longer snail mail interview invites, as I call it, it's just constantly checking your email like a madman. I mean, basically you're just there, refresh, 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 refresh. Please let it be the interview today. It's very similar to residency interviewing as well, where when you get an interview invitation, it just pops up as a little invite that like pops up in your Gmail, right? Or like whatever email, that you give the program. And so you're constantly like, you feel the vibration in your pocket. Oh my gosh, a new email. It's that another interview. And that's really how it is, and I can relate to all of you with that because it's a stressful time. After all the hard work that you put into the personal statement and the secondaries and the MCAT and all that, you want to get those interviews. And the last thing you want is to get that email right after you paid the $100 fee for the secondary that says, sorry, thanks for the $100 fee, but you're rejected. That happened to me, let's see, 2 days after I submitted a secondary for one of the schools. That was interesting. Some of the interview invites, we definitely have a new poll up there now just to ask you all, where some of you stand. Maybe some of you have interviews by now. Maybe some of you are still waiting. It's completely variable. And again, some of it depends on when you submitted the application. Interviews, are going to start coming out usually around August, September-ish. It varies by school and kind of when they want to go after, sending out their whole rolling admissions process. But definitely when you get it, usually via email, it'll give you an idea of like, this is how you schedule it. These are the available dates and times. And so then it's either, they might have like a link. There's a certain website called Interview Broker that a lot of schools use. That's kind of an electronic way to just select something rather than shoot an email back. It might be different for each school. So you just got to pay attention to the details. Definitely agree with a lot of the stuff that Maria said about scheduling and rescheduling. I would tell all of you to, when you schedule an interview date, please be absolutely sure that you are available on that date, because it doesn't really look good if you send an email like 30 minutes later saying, actually, can I do this date instead? Unless there's a pretty darn good reason. Again, remember, everything that you send to even, the secretary, the coordinator, whoever is responsible for this, all of that is part of your file, so if the coordinator sees you're like trying to reschedule a million times, that doesn't really look good. So you've got to be, very on top of this with regards to, when are you available? And the moment that you schedule that interview, you better go on Southwest or, like whatever airline service that you want to use, look for those flights, look for the hotel, get all that scheduling in place as early as you can. And then number of interviews to attend, definitely you want to go on as many as you can, like Maria said. So I got interviews at 12 places. I went on all 12 interviews. Now, did I have to? No. A day that stands out in my heart is October 15th, which for all of you probably know by now that that's the first day that med schools can send out official acceptances to candidates. And so, my wife, for example, who's also a doctor, definitely smarter than me because she got her acceptance on October 15th. I didn't get mine until November. When she got her acceptance on October 15th, and it was the school where she knew she wanted to go, she turned down a few other interviews that were scheduled kind of later in the fall or in the spring. For me, I think I just wanted to see kind of the lay of the land. And thankfully, my mom was able to help me financially to get to those interviews to just experience it. But it really just come down to, if you get accepted into the place of your choice, you don't have to go on the other interviews. It's, totally fine. There are definitely some schools out there that you'll see that they say they don't send out acceptances until one day. For some of them, it's like all the way until March or April that they send a batch email out to everybody. So that's a little bit different of game versus a rolling admissions process where like 2 or 3 weeks later after the interview. So you just have to, keep it all in mind. It's a strategy. It's a strategy throughout the process. And the best you can do is just keep going on interviews, because I certainly did not get accepted to all 12 places. I only got accepted to 4 places, so that's 33% of where I interview at. And I consider myself a, pretty sociable guy, that would do well. But still, it's a tough, competitive process out there. And so the more interviews that you get, the better your odds are for getting that acceptance. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. One thing I really want to add on to something that Matt said, he was talking about how your emails back and forth between an administrative assistant will become part of your file. That also goes to your tone and how you treat anybody you interact with through that school. When you come for an interview, if you're doing something like an MMI process where you're going to have a guide taking you around, guiding you from station to station, if you are rude or disrespectful or anything to any of those people, it will be noted and that will count against you. So you need to make sure you are treating every single person there as somebody who can make or break your acceptance to that school. Keep that in mind. So your first impression with every person you encounter is super important. And that's one of the things that I think oftentimes we kind of overlook or don't think about. And you're so focused on getting to your next station within the interview or the next part of the process from what you're going through that you forget to take a moment and smile and say thank you to the person who directed you to the next room you need to go to, or let you know, hey, you've got another 5 minutes before we're going to call you back for this. So just remember those things. All of those first impressions amongst all of these people that you encounter makes a big difference. The other thing I really want to emphasize is the timeline. Matt was talking about the rolling admissions process. Many schools are moving to that. That means that your promptness on returning your secondaries is actually huge. Secondaries are often the gateway to your interview. Your secondary may determine whether or not you get that interview. So if you take your time returning those, it may delay you getting an interview and other slots are being filled. And because it's a rolling admissions process, they're starting to fill those however many slots they have for that incoming class as quickly as possible because they want the top candidates in there. Keep in mind if there's a deadline or that kind of stuff for returning secondaries, you want to be well within that. Don't push it. I'm trying to think, we have a couple questions. If they give you options for interview dates, is it better to schedule them earlier than later so there are more slots to fill in the incoming class? That's a great question. And if it's a rolling admissions process, the sooner you can get out an interview, the better. That gives you that chance to be one of the first impressions, one of the top candidates, and really put your best foot forward. Do med schools have different deadlines to accept admission? Yes, they do. And you're going to want to double check with each school that you're applying to as to what their requirements are. What if you're waiting to hear from another school before giving a different school a decision? There is a way to kind of delay that decision. I'm going to let Maria speak on that because I think she's got a little bit more expertise on that particular question, but you can kind of do a conditional acceptance for some schools. So Maria, I'm going to turn it back over to you and let you kind of handle that question.
Thank you, Laura. Yes. Absolutely. You can hold multiple acceptances. You can hold as many as you can get your little hands on up until March 15th. So you can say yes to every school. And we know you've said yes. We get lists from the AAMC letting us know where people have been accepted. We don't know where you've applied, but we know where else you've been accepted. But come March 15th, you have to release all but one of your acceptances. And so after March 15th, you can still receive a new acceptance, but you have to, within a 2-week period, if it's close to March 15th, it may be, a 24-hour period if we're in June, and that you have to make a decision between the acceptance you had been holding and the new one that you just received. But of course, you won't get that acceptance unless you do well on the interview. So let's get back to talking about the interview process itself and some of the do's and don'ts. So how do you prepare for the interview? Well, You need to go back over your MCAS application and the secondary you completed for that application and refresh your memory about everything you said. Because if it's a traditional interview, everything in your application is wide open to be discussed in the interview itself. And you want to make sure that you are consistent in what you say at the interview, as well as what you had said in your application. You want to have read through that medical school's marketing materials. You want to have gone online and learned anything that you can about the interview questions that they ask. You want to know what people who attend that medical school, what they think of the school. And again, there are websites that have that kind of chatter going on. So you just want to familiarize yourself with not only you, and you would think that of course you know what you said in your application, but in the heat of an interview, you might trip up over dates or hours that you said you did an activity, or when you took this class or that class. So again, you just want to go back and review your resume, if you will, which is your application. And you want to have some prepared questions for the school, because every interviewer is going to ask you at the close of an interview, do you have any questions? And while you don't have to have a question, you just don't look as serious about them if you don't have questions. And we all, as human beings, and certainly as admissions officers, we want to know that you want to come to our school. And so it's not just a matter of flattery, it's just understanding that it's human nature and you should have questions. You know, if you're taking this process seriously, you should absolutely have questions about the school. So are there questions for you not to ask? Yes, there are. You should not ask anything that you can read about online. And you should not ask a faculty interviewer questions that would be specific to the student experience. That's something you should ask a student interviewer, and vice versa. You shouldn't be asking a student interviewer or a community member interviewer things about the next scheduled curriculum reform decisions and what they're considering. Those are faculty purview, and that would be more appropriate for a faculty member. You also shouldn't ask obvious questions or superficial questions. Let me give you an example. As you already know, was at the medical school in San Diego, and San Diego is one of the best surf locations in the continental United States, if not the best. And we would occasionally have people asking us about the surfing. We did not consider that to be the wisest use of your time in terms of questions to ask us. Ask thoughtful, insightful questions of the appropriate type of interviewer. Match your interviewer to the type of question that you want to be asking. I'm going to turn it over to Matt now.
Great. So with the, preparing for the interview, I'll have to say that of anything to prepare for, there is just nothing more important than that. Like, coming into an interview unprepared is probably the worst decision you could make. After all the hard work that all of you put into the actual application, the personal statements, getting the letters, studying for the MCAT, you got your interview. Do not, just kind of give only 50% right at the end. Preparation is, one of the most important parts. And, part of it is why, we're here, is to show you guys that we are, in a great avenue to help you all prepare. So Kaplan offers mock interview sessions, which I think is really the best way to prepare, is giving one-on-one practice and feedback live as you answer questions. So, yesterday, when I asked my student, tell me about, your research in college. She better know her research pretty darn well, and not just something that's like an overarching, like, well, we discovered this or we did this, but what did you do? What did you find? What were the results? Is it something, that you plan to continue in medical school, stuff like that, really getting to the nitty gritty of, do you know yourself? And it almost seems like a funny question, right? Like, of course we know ourselves, but being able to articulate who you are and the strengths of your application and how they apply to you as a physician and as a great asset to the medical school, that is a difficult thing. And that's what we're here to help you all with. So when you meet with us on one-on-one sessions, we're going to give you those hard questions, and we're going to give you feedback to make sure not only your body language, you're able to sit up straight, give eye contact, everything like that, but also how you're articulating things, how you're able to, sum your application. Believe me, I mean, there's some people that I've met that have had amazing MCAT scores and GPAs that have not been able to get into medical school. And the reason it comes down to is the interview, because some people are just not good at interviewing and they have not taken the time to prepare. And a lot of that is starting off with mock interviews. So, come to Kaplan and we will, help you by doing these mock interviews. Definitely one of the big things we stress is no memorizing, making sure that it's a flowing, logical, just kind of talking through an answer. And when we get to kind of the live interviewing later tonight, I'll throw in a little bit more tips and tricks with that as well, just with regards to how we try to make sure that your answers are connected to, the medical school, being a doctor, connecting to the school itself. So for instance, if somebody were to just answer a question by listing off, their 3 strengths, there's a difference compared to if you list those strengths off by giving evidence of your experiences and then how they relate to you being a physician down the road. And, it's definitely not something to underestimate. Being able to interview well takes a long time to, prepare for. But again, it's something that we are here to help you out with. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. One thing that I really want to kind of talk about too, when we talk about dressing for success, one of the things to keep in mind, suits and that kind of stuff, but footwear. You may be in an interview process where you're walking around a lot or you're going up and down a lot of stairs. This is not the time to break in new shoes. This is not the time to wear shoes that after a few hours start to hurt your feet. So kind of really think about your comfort level, because if you start to become more uncomfortable in your clothing throughout the interview, it's going to come across as not putting your best foot forward. So those are definitely some things to consider. The other thing I really want you to think about too is who your interviewer is as you walk into that room. Now, if you're doing the MMI, which is the format I am more familiar with, you may be walking into a room with a community member. They're judging you from their perspective. So they're looking at, is this somebody I want as my physician? Can I establish a conversation with them? Am I willing to reveal personal information to this person? Are they going to be able to convince me that they care about my well-being and that they're there to make sure that I'm going to be comfortable with them as my doctor? So those are definitely some things to think about. The other thing that Matt kind of touched on is the thought process that goes into this. If you're doing an MMI where you have a scenario that you get a couple minutes to review before you walk into the room, that's not the time to prepare your entire answer, like Matt said. That's the time to really kind of think about what are the big ideas that you want to talk about. But the interview is really looking for your thought process. If you sit down and start rambling off, a textbook type answer for that, that's not necessarily coming across as the best thing. They're looking for, how do you walk through this particular scenario or problem, and how do you problem solve within that? I'm not seeing any other questions pop up at the moment, so I am going to turn it back over to Maria to continue this conversation.
Thank you, Laura. So I hope what you got from what we've all just said is you really do need to prepare for the interview. And part of that preparation is going to be, as Laura just talked about, your dress. and how you're dressed. And I just want to link that back to the preparation. When you go through your mock interview, you should absolutely do at least one of your preparations, and I would say it's your last one, dressed in whatever it is you're going to wear to your interview. Because what I would see, let me first say what you're going to wear. You're going to wear a suit, and for women, it's either a suit, a pantsuit, or a dress suit, a skirt suit. But this is a formal occasion that you're going to. It does not mean that you need to be in black tie, but it does mean that you need to look very polished. It is not the time for you to make personal fashion statements, although certainly what is acceptable on the West Coast may vary quite a bit from what is acceptable in the middle states or on the New England states. So again, let's get down to a little bit more specifics. For men, on the West Coast, you can get away with a sports coat, but you will still wear a button-down shirt and a tie. On the East Coast and the middle states, you're more likely to see, I would say 80–85% of men will be in a suit, a two-piece suit. And again, with a button-down shirt and a tie. Women, pantsuits are perfectly fine, as are skirts or dresses. But if you are wearing a skirt suit or a dress suit, women, please listen to me. Your hem will be no more than 2 inches above your knees. Why? Because when you sit down, your skirt gets shorter. And if you start out with your dress or your skirt more than 2 inches shorter than your knees, above your knees, it's going to get a lot shorter. And I would have your interviewers in my office telling me that they thought you were trying to hit on them, which I'm sure was not the case. So be very mindful of the length of your skirt or your dress if you're opting not to do your pantsuit. Laura was totally correct about the shoes. This is not the time to break in new shoes. And it's also the time for you to consider what is the appropriate wear given the weather conditions of where I'm going. If you are interviewing right now in many areas in the country, your feet are going to swell significantly because it is so hot right now. Conversely, if it is raining or snowing, it is not appropriate for you to be in dress shoes. You're going to want to have something a little bit more rugged that can take that kind of weather. Even if you're not outside, you still got to get from your vehicle to the medical school proper. And for many schools, you are going to be outside and having to get from one place to another. You're going to want to think about, for women, are you carrying a purse or is it a briefcase? Are you taking an umbrella with you everywhere? What is it that the accompaniments on top of just the outfit that you're wearing? I think I'm going to stop at this point and turn it over to Matt.
Great. And, I don't have much to add on the actual, suit wear. I think it's a pretty straightforward thing. I will say, the trips on the airplanes, always a difficult thing. For some reason, airlines just are not made to keep a suit nice and pressed. So it was always like a difficult process in my head. Like, how the heck am I supposed to keep this suit nice and pressed and straightforward as I travel? And so, rarely would I get a flight attendant who's like, sure, I can hang this up in the cruise quarters. And other ones would be like, no, you can't do that. And then I would just have to throw it up there, and like the carry-on. And then I'd have to worry about, okay, well, now I have to like pull out the iron in the hotel that I never use and, want to press it and like make sure. So, definitely something to consider, whether you're packing it well, and just making sure you don't show up and it looks like, the suit's just been, like basically rolled up out of a garbage bag. It really is about the first impression look, where I'm looking at you, Maria's looking at you, Laura's looking at you and saying, could this be my doctor? That's a big question. So if I show up and my tie is, loose, my button is unbuttoned, and I'm going to talk about the facial hair next, Probably not, but these are just things to consider. Now, grooming wise, I always like to kind of put a big thing on grooming here. So obviously applies more to men. You definitely want to be clean shaven. If you don't have like a, really trimmed up beard and mustache look. So, don't look like you've got a 5 o'clock shadow, or, you haven't shaved in the past 5 days and just forgot the morning of. Definitely does not look good. You want to look like a professional that, is very well groomed and looks good. So definitely take the time. If you have a beard and mustache and you want to keep it, go to the barber, get it trimmed up, make sure it looks nice. Makeup, especially for women here, be conservative with this. No over the top makeup. You don't want to make yourself look like, super, super flashy. It has to be a, kind of conservative approach. Cologne and perfume, dangerous things here. Why? Because some of your interviewers may be allergic to it and they start sneezing and they're like, oh my gosh, the applicant has totally flared up my allergies for the day. Or two, people might think your cologne or perfume smells horrible, even if you think it smells great. So honestly, I would completely avoid it. And, if you feel like you have to have some to feel confident, minimal at best. And then finally, your breath. So a lot of people, unfortunately, don't think about this, even in the professional world. Different doctors I see, they honestly don't give too much thought to their breath, which can sometimes be horrible and is a big turnoff for the interviewer. If your breath smells. So be conscientious of that. Use Listerine in the morning, have a Tic Tac or mint on you, no gum. Please do not be that student that starts chewing gum for the whole time. Nobody's going to appreciate that. No hard candy either, not like you're eating something during the interview, just something that gives your breath, a nice regular smell to it. Again, this is, not to scare you all, but just in the morning when you're getting ready, just, be mindful of this. Use some common sense of how to look and act professionally as a future physician. Laura.
Thank you, Matt. A couple other things to kind of add on to that. Your accessories. This is not the time for an armful of dangly bracelets that are going to make a lot of noise as you're talking. So limit, no big dangly earrings that can be distracting. Conservative, if any at all. A couple questions came in. For females, is it more professional to button up the jacket of a suit or leave it unbuttoned? Usually at least one button is considered more professional rather than unbuttoning it. So that's something to think about in terms of the fit. If you can comfortably sit down and still have at least one button done. And then how do med schools feel about tattoos and piercing? That's a great question because those are definitely becoming more mainstream. One thing I will caution, anything on the face or neck area is definitely going to be frowned upon by most schools. A very conservative stud in the nose may be acceptable for some, but not everybody. So that kind of stuff, you would want to have removed, taken out. If you've got facial tattoos and that kind of stuff, not many schools are going to be open to that. And that does go for tattoos on the hands and fingers, more of the exposed areas. Those are things ladies, if you have tattoos on the legs, darker pantyhose will cover those. So that would be, getting those darker nylons would be something to do. You really want to have most of that stuff covered up. Again, you don't know who you're going to be walking into. If you've got a community member who happens to be of a generation where that kind of expression is not acceptable, that could count against you in terms of your impression and how they score you. So definitely think about that. Eye contact, your phone off, like off, not on vibrate, off. And that's something to make sure that you do. Outside weather, Maria kind of touched on this a little bit too. I'm in Arizona, and if you're coming from the Midwest in November, you're probably thinking cold weather. It's not going to be cold here. Outside, you walk inside and you're going to be frozen from the air conditioning most places. So you may want a jacket or something like that that you can easily remove as you go outside, keeping in mind that you probably don't want to have something sleeveless on underneath unless it's a wider sleeve. So that would be another thing to kind of consider in terms of weather and how you're going to dress. Any advice about nail polish for women? I've heard nude colors are fine, but is it best to wear none? Nude colors should be fine. I wouldn't go, like, I tend to have colorful nails because that's what I enjoy, but it's not something I would have for my interview. And a nude color, we're talking like a really light pearly pink or a beige, something that's going to blend more into your skin tone. So keep that in mind. Even a clear polish, just so your nails look groomed. And that's the other thing. Make sure your fingers are groomed and that kind of stuff, so your nails are trimmed shorter. Having those really long nails that may be trendy, or the ones that are filed into that coffin shape that I've seen a lot, those are not going to make the best impression. So definitely trimming those down and keeping them as conservative as possible. Limiting your jewelry, you know, if you tend to wear several rings, bringing it down to just one or two. So again, it's more conservative. A watch, maybe one bracelet, a small necklace, nothing ostentatious, nothing too expressive. Again, you're trying not to draw attention to your accessories. You want to draw attention to your personality that you convey through your interview question and answer sessions, not that you convey through how you dress. Travel, or what else to pack, I think I'm going to have Maria touch on those. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura. So why is it important how you dress? You know, we've been making a big deal about that, and I am sure that there are many of you who are wondering, why can't I be myself? Why can't I dress in a way that reflects my value system? And here's the answer. We are concerned about how you will show respect to your patients. It's all about your patients when you are a physician. It's not about you. You are not the center of the room, the universe. It is your patients. And so your job is to modify your behavior in a way that will inspire confidence in your patients, that will inspire them to make the health changes that they need to make, the behavioral changes that will positively affect their health. And so when Laura said that as a community member, when you walk into her interview, she's thinking, I want to share my private information with this person. Well, we all make judgments based on our first impression, which is usually visual. Do you look the part, and are you showing respect to that patient? In this case, it is substituting, it's the interviewer, but they're substituting for how would you behave and treat a patient. So that's why it's important. It's not that we expect you to be a clone of the next applicant walking through the door or your fellow medical students. It's because we want to know that it is important to you to show respect to your future patients. Okay, what else to pack? I think the biggest thing I can say here is everything's going to go in your carry-on. You are not going to check your luggage, because luggage really does get lost. And I can remember one memorable interview that was an applicant who was dressed in clothes that he had cobbled together from our medical students that he was staying with. And we'll talk a little bit more about what your sleeping options the night before the interview. But when he got there, his luggage didn't. And so the medical students all pitched in to try to put together an appropriate set of dress wear for him. And he was in borrowed shoes and borrowed pants and a borrowed jacket. And that's not what you want to do, because it's not going to give you that same level of confidence when you walk into an interview that you're wearing borrowed clothes. So you're going to check everything. And as Matt said, that starts to get a little tricky in terms of it's going usually in the overhead, and you're hoping that somebody else isn't putting, you know, whatever it is that they're bringing on the plane on top of your luggage. So you're not going to have a lot of room, but you want to take certainly everything that is important to you to have on that trip. phone charger, medications, things of that nature. But the bottom line is you're checking your luggage. Matt?
Yeah, so definitely, and I just think of my suit just getting wrinkled by so many people's luggage. It's been through the ringer. So just a few other things. So, basic ideas, this is just like whenever we kind of leave town and think, what did we forget? So phone charger, medications, contacts, glasses, bringing an extra pair of contacts just in case, right? You don't want to show up to the interview, oh my gosh, I lost one of my contacts, what am I going to do? Then you're blind for the whole day, right? That would be me because I have horrible vision. Again, these things do happen. Don't let them happen to you. Bring deodorants. You don't want to smell, okay? Breath, armpits, there's many different smells that can be elicited. Again, think of these things beforehand. Great first impression. Bring some cash with you. Uber, taxi, thinking of these things beforehand. You're always going to need some cash just in case. Okay, you want to be ready for this. A lot of people ask about padfolios, right? So those are those cool looking, leather 8x11 things that contain, paper, pen. I think it's a great idea because it's good for you to take notes during the session. It's also good because I always recommend my students to bring copies of their resume. Just in case. It's unlikely that an interviewer is going to necessarily ask for it, but you never know. And it's always good to be the prepared one who's there. Bring an extra set of clothes. What if your flight gets delayed or canceled leaving the place, right? You want to be ready for that. And then, bring a book or a tablet for some downtime. And then just, jumping a little bit into travel, and I know Maria is probably going to say a little bit more about it too, but with the carry-on stuff, definitely I recommend carry-on. Ever since I saw the movie Meet the Parents, I, rarely, if ever, want to check a bag anymore, just because I just think about them losing my stuff, and, going through that whole horrendous process that Ben Stiller went through in that movie. Like I said before, book your flight, book your hotel early. Again, this can be an expensive process. $500 to $2,000 per interview is what I would estimate. Again, some people might be a little bit more conservative. There's Airbnbs. Some med schools offer some sort of overnight program where medical students offer the opportunity for you to stay with them for the night, which is great, right? Because then you, number one, save some money, and two, you get to meet them beforehand. So it's nice. Book a hotel that's close to the program. What happens if you wake up and it's a torrential downpour, all the taxis are not in use, the shuttle service of the hotel is broken down? Again, this stuff happens, okay? I've heard horror stories. You need to think of this stuff beforehand. So I talked with Laura outside of this, and she said she kind of covered her main stuff for travel, Maria. So if you wanted to jump back in, if you had any other thoughts with the travel.
Thanks, Matt. I don't have any major points, but I do want to point out that if you stay with the student, as Matt said, the host program the night before, that is a wonderful opportunity to really talk to students off the record, except really nothing's off the record. If you treat your hosts inappropriately, if you expect to be shuttled around, if you expect for them to make accommodations, if you eat their food without, having been invited to eat their food, that is going to funnel back to the admissions office and will go down, that you were not a nice guest. And I think you should also keep in mind that usually there's not going to be an extra bed for you. You're going to be sleeping on the couch, and you have to ask yourself what kind of good night's sleep are you going to get that night, or lack thereof. So it's a balance as to what's more important to you, to see students in their natural environment, or to make sure that you get the best sleep possible and that you don't inadvertently make a bad impression on your hosts. Okay, so let's move ahead to our next slide, which is talking about what to expect. So there are medical schools that the night before, they will have some sort of informal get-together, whether that's a dinner or a social hour for you to meet with faculty and students. Again, it counts. These are wonderful opportunities for you to learn a lot about the school, but it's also a wonderful opportunity for the school to learn about you in a social setting. And you have to be again, just very mindful of how you are coming across. Matt?
So the pre-interview night definitely, as Maria said, can be stressful depending on if there is a social session beforehand. Social gatherings, they're dangerous situations. It's not college anymore where you can just have as many drinks as you want and everything's okay the next morning. This is the professional world where you're going to be interacting with a lot of people who are going to look at you and be like, hey, could I see myself with Matt, for the next few years? Obviously not, right? But so, if there is a dinner beforehand, you should try to go to it because it shows that you're interested, you want to meet people, and just, be relaxed and have a good time and be nice and kind to everybody. Same stuff applies as we're going to talk about in the social awareness portion. One alcoholic drink at most. Let me reiterate that. One alcoholic drink at most. You do not want to be the one who people know as finishing off a bottle of wine the night before. Okay, this is not the time to just, have a great time. Even if med students, try to, say, oh, sure, have another drink, it's okay. No, be the one who just says, it's okay, I just want to be prepared for my interview tomorrow just because it's very important to me. Do not stay out late. Get a good night's sleep before bed, get back to the hotel, get your outfit ready, get your application, reviewed, review the school one more time, get yourself in game mode, that you're ready to wake up. You've got those multiple alarms set, call down to the wake up call service at the hotel, have them give you a wake up call, set a phone alarm, have your significant other or friend call you in the morning. I don't care how many alarms that you have, do it. Don't just depend on your phone, which for all you know is going to lose battery 1 minute before it's supposed to go off, and then you miss the interview. Again, these things happen. Don't let yourself be the one that they happen to. It's all about preparation. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. So yeah, the social hour or dinner that you might go to the night before, this is also a chance where you're going to be showing off your mingling and your small talk skills. If you tend to be that person who, especially in a new situation with people you don't know, kind of shies away from interacting with other people or waits for people to approach you, you're going to want to do some practice to kind of move past that. You want to be able to initiate small talk with strangers. And by small talk, this is not the time to get into political debates, those controversial topics that you're going to encounter people who do not share the same viewpoints as you. And this is not the time to get into those discussions. Keeping it more general and more social. This is relax as much as you can. Remember to smile when you're talking to people. Matt mentioned earlier about your breath for the interview. Same thing on these. Brush your teeth before you go. That may also limit the alcohol that you want to drink because it's probably not going to mix too well with the taste of toothpaste. So that's another thing too. But nurse the one drink. Matt said one alcoholic drink at most. Nurse that. But I would also emphasize hydrate, drinking water and stuff, because this is a mentally taxing situation for some people, especially if you tend to be more of that wallflower type. You're a little more introverted initially. You want to make sure that you are preparing yourself and presenting yourself in the best way possible. So staying hydrated, sipping on water, avoiding the alcohol as much as possible, making proper social small talk. All right, Maria.
And of course, we've been focusing on the wallflower, the person who is a little bit more introverted and might have a challenge with small talk, but there's also the other extreme. There are those of us who, when we are nervous, when we're anxious, we exhibit chattermouth and we don't give other people a chance to talk. So if you know that you tend to be on that side of the fence, that initiating conversation is not your problem, it's remembering to let someone else participate in the conversation that is, Be aware of that, because that also is going to come back to the admissions office. So the interview day itself, try to arrive 15 minutes early, which may mean that you will do a dry run the night before, but certainly be aware that parking can be a challenge, so you might want to take a cab instead. Even if you have driven to that interview, you might park somewhere else and then call an Uber to actually get there. Be aware that for some medical schools, you're going to get the schedule ahead of time. You will know who you are interviewing with and when. For other schools, you won't know anything until you arrive and are handed your schedule. And that also means, and I don't think we touched upon this when we were talking about traveling, you don't necessarily want to book a plane out that night, because I certainly have had interviewers who something happened and they ended up running late, which meant the interviewee ended up running late. And if you have a plane scheduled a little too close to the end of business hours and you end up going over those business hours, you certainly don't want to have to deal with a change fee with the airport and the airline, nor do you want to say to your interviewer, gosh, I'm sorry, I've got to go. You usually will get some sort of an orientation at the beginning of the day, usually by the admissions director, who is just going to lay out a little bit more about what's going to happen in your day. And then typically you'll also have lunch with someone during the middle of the day, assuming that your interview lasts the majority of the day. And then you'll oftentimes have a debriefing at the end. Matt?
So just remember, everyone, the day begins the moment that you step out of that Uber or taxi and you roll in and say hello to that first person. I don't care who it is, a janitor, some little kid who's a patient, I don't care who it is, but the moment that you walk out of that taxi, even with the taxi driver, even with the hotel concierge, for all you know, you just don't know who is connected to who. Believe me, I have heard stories from admissions people who have said that applicants, they remember one time the applicants, like there was a group of applicants that were making fun of somebody as one of the admissions officers was dressed in his like bike outfit, kind of passed them by, and they probably didn't think he was on the admissions committee. And basically he immediately went up to the admissions office, looked up their pictures and said, don't let them in. Basically just off that one experience, and that's something you have to be mindful of. This is, a very important thing where it's not just the 30 minutes you sit for an interview that matters. It is every interaction that you have. You need to be a kind and respectful person from the moment you start. And with the schedule, I don't have much to add. It gets, definitely repetitive after some time, depending on the interviews that you go to, but be interested, right? I mean, there's going to be, sometimes where you're tired, you're eating a stale bagel and like sitting there and you want to check your phone or like you doze off or something. No. Be the energized, enthusiastic, interested student who's glad to be there, who wants to be there, and you're like that to the end of the day, to the moment you get back, in that cab, in that hotel room, on that airplane. You are just, the great person that you are, that was on paper and now is here in person. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, so think about too the process that you're going to be going throughout the day. As you're being taken on a tour, it's not the time to comment that a particular sculpture or plant or building design or anything like that in a negative manner. You may want to ask an interesting question. If you're in a part of the country where they've got foliage that you've never seen before, ask about that, because showing your interest in that community is actually a huge selling point to schools, because you're going to live there for 4 years, maybe longer if you end up doing a residency match there. You are going to be part of that community. So showing your interest in that means as you have a student that is taking you from one portion of your day to the next, ask them some questions about the environment, about the community. get to know what's going on around you, because that interest is going to go a long way in terms of the positive impression that you are making on the people you're interacting with during that process. Maria, back to you.
I've got one more thing that I would like to add that comes under the social awareness, and that is personal space. That it is important that you respect personal space. And sometimes if you're from different cultures, that your personal space is defined differently than what we are used to in this country. But generally speaking, you don't get any closer to someone than arm's length. So if you put out your arm in front of you, fully extended, you should not be any closer than that to someone. And with the one exception possibly being if you're shaking hands, and you should practice having a good handshake, a good firm handshake. Hopefully your hand is dry, and I appreciate that for many people that a wet palm is something that is very challenging for them to control, but try to do your best to control that, but practice a firm handshake, and that certainly goes for women also. Nobody likes which you think of as a typical feminine handshake, which is just extending your fingers. That's not appropriate in a professional setting. And one thing I saw way more often than I would have thought possible is nobody else comes with you to the interview. Even if you're just talking about going to the admissions office, nobody else comes with you. Not your significant other, not your parent, not your children. You go and you alone, because you're the focus. It's not family time. It is not time that that you indicate, because the message that comes across to us is that you need your support system even to go to an interview, and you're the one who's being accepted to medical school, not these other people. Let's talk a little bit about the interview format. So there are the MMIs, the multiple mini interviews, which Laura is going to be talking about more extensively. But there's also still very much the traditional one-on-one where you sit down with an interviewer and they may have structured questions that they are asking you, and it also could be very informal, and they're just kind of going through your application and saying, oh, tell me a little bit more about this, tell me a little bit more about that, or how about that sports game last night, or what did you think about the headline in the paper? So it can run the entire gamut in terms of whether there are formal structured questions or whether it's very informal. It could also be several of these one-on-one interviews, or it could be a panel interview, which means there's one of you and several of them. And that can be a little tricky with eye contact. And who should you look at? Is it the person who asked you the question, or do you want to make eye contact with the entire panel? The answer is the latter, with a little bit more emphasis on the person who asked you the question. It can also mean a free-for-all panel, which is there's several interviewers and there's several applicants, and you are being asked questions by the interviewers to all of you. And part of this is showing just how do you interact with your team members. And it's a team game. It is not who's going to win the interview. It is, are you showing respect to each other? Still giving your answer, but being respectful and not interrupting, not monopolizing the conversation. Matt?
So most of the stuff that Maria said with regards to the social awareness, I don't really have much to add about that. I think just as Laura was saying before, turning off your phone, huge thing. Even if, in reality, it's because, there's like something urgent that you're checking. And even if you explain that, it's still, it just doesn't look the best to have a phone out doing anything for that matter. So really just try to keep it off. And that's what, if you have a watch or something, that's when, you can look at the time doing that. The rest of the stuff with the social awareness, Maria touched on well. With regards to the interview formats, just a few examples, from my experience. So conventional interviews, one-on-one, most common over my 12 interviews. So it would be, I'd be sitting in a room and somebody, basically one of the interviewers would come grab me and be like, hey, Matt, I'm such and such, I'm going to be one of your interviewers, right? So then we'd walk over to his or her office, we'd sit down, they'd usually start off by, tell me about yourself and do a little small talk and then going into stuff. And that's when, they usually will be writing stuff down, okay? And that's a big thing to be careful about, is expect them to not maintain eye contact with you all the time, because they need to take notes. They are going to go back to the admissions committee and have to remember stuff that you're saying. Don't be intimidated by that. I remember there was one experience where it was a group interview, 2 interviewers and me, where one of them had this stern look on his face, and he had a yellow pad of paper with his, left leg on top of the right leg, and just kind of writing on the paper in front of himself like this, as he would look at me as I was responding to the question by one of the other interviewers. And I would just be thinking, oh man, I wonder what this guy is writing about me, and so it's something where, don't be intimidated. It's all part of the process with it. For me, I thought that the group interview with multiple candidates was almost more dangerous than the panel interview, where it's just me and there's multiple people interviewing me at once. For some people it might be different, but you have to be careful if you're in the same room with other applicants, because one, you don't want to try to outdo them and be the gunner, okay? You want to definitely avoid being the gunner. You want to be the one who is respectful and allowing other people to answer a question, in addition, by giving your very articulate answer, but never putting anybody in a negative light, never saying that you think you did something better than such and such, because that's part of the interview. The interviewers want to see how you interact with these other candidates who, yes, are your competitors, but you have to be kind with them. And it's a difficult thing. The panel can be stressful. There was one interview I was at where there was 7 people interviewing me. I was at the head of a table in a big conference room, 7 people, 3 on one side of the table, 4 on the other side, all had my application in front of them, and they just went one by one asking a different question. Like Maria said, trying to make eye contact, it's a difficult thing. You're choosing like who you're to make eye contact with. Generally, I went with the ones who were smiling or giving me nods, because I felt like those were going to give me good positive notes of the admissions committee. But again, these are different formats, which you'll be exposed to both during the interview sessions, as well as, what we'll talk about more on our one-on-one sessions and our mock interviews. Laura, back to you.
Thank you, Matt. So the MMI format, this is something that we're seeing a little bit more with medical schools, because it's not quite as scripted, and you can prep for it, but at the same time, you can't completely prep for it. There are different things that may happen. So basically, the gist of it is you'll have a certain number of interview stations to go to, and you'll be the person rotating rather than somebody coming to get you and taking you somewhere. You may have a guide who directs you to the next one. You may just have an order that you have to go through and find the next one on your own. Outside of that station, outside of that room, there's going to be a scenario posted, and you'll be given just a couple of minutes to read through that scenario, kind of think of what direction your answer is headed in, and then you'll be invited into that space with the interviewer. Now, this could be where it's just 2 chairs facing each other, so you may not have any sort of barrier between you. Remember when Maria mentioned the skirts and being too short as you sit down? Something to think about. They may be behind a desk and you may be sitting, on the other side of that desk. It may be a small table that you sit at. You may not have a firm surface in front of you, so your hands may be in your lap, and the interviewer sees that sees you completely in how you present yourself and hold yourself. fidgeting, and that kind of stuff, there's a certain amount of that that's acceptable and that's expected. But having your hands folded neatly in your lap, being thoughtful with your answers. It is totally okay for there to be a few moments of silence as you gather your thoughts. When the interviewer asks you a question, it's completely okay to take a moment, gather your thoughts, and then begin your answer. That pause, even though it may feel awkward, if you practice that enough, you'll get more comfortable with it and allowing you a chance to formulate what you're going to say rather than spewing right off the top of your head, which may end up going in the direction that you were not intending. Keeping in mind, not necessarily a right or wrong answer. It will be some sort of subject matter. It may be a current event. It may be a controversial topic. So keep in mind what's out there in the news right now. Any of those topics are really fair game in terms of scenarios. It may be asking you some of the basic questions that you would get in a traditional one, talking about your strengths and your weaknesses, a time that you succeeded and what did you do right, or a time that you did not succeed and how did you handle that? How did you grow from that? Any of those are fair game for MMI questions. So take time to gather your thoughts before you respond. Don't start spewing right off the bat. Maria, back to you.
So really, there's not a big difference in terms of the questions that you're going to be asked at a traditional interview versus an MMI interview. In general, there are certainly types of questions that only present themselves in an MMI, such as the simulated patient, or occasionally you hear of MMI interviews that ask you to do it as a team. It's you and somebody else, and one of you has a graph that you're supposed to describe or an art that you're supposed to describe, and your partner is supposed to be interpreting what it is they hear you describing. Things that you simply could not do in a more traditional interview. Those are not the norm. The norm is that you're going to get the same kinds of questions in both. And with the MMI, the advantage, if you will, is that you have 5 or 6 or 7, depending upon how many stations there are, opportunities to impress someone. And you get to take that couple of minutes on the front end to not only read the question, but also to think about your answer. In the more traditional interview setting, it's just you and an interviewer or the panel of interviewers and you, and they ask the question, and I think the knee-jerk kind of reaction is for people to just jump in and their mouth starts moving before they've actually thought about what their answer is. So that is the prime opportunity to take advantage of Laura's advice, to put that to use, which is pause and think. Even if you don't need to, even if you are so glad they asked this question because you've got an answer for it, you want to appear to give thought as opposed to just immediately start speaking. We are all looking for people who are thoughtful. And one of the biggest mistakes that I would see people make, we see this in the secondary, we see this in the essays that you're being asked to write, but we certainly see it in the interview, is you think you understood what the question was, but you didn't. Or you were hoping to get a question, and in between the time the question left the interviewer's mouth and it actually reached your ears and your brain, you turned it into the question that you wanted. Make sure you understand the question that is being asked. And if you don't, ask a clarifying question so that you can actually respond to the question that they want you to respond to. And as Laura said, take a moment to gather your thoughts before you start speaking. So a couple of things about the common interview questions before we actually get into our simulation. Common interview questions are going to be questions that are about you. Tell me more about you. that very, very open-ended. Something more specific of, what are your strengths and weaknesses, or something very specific. Tell me about this particular activity that you were involved with. I'd like to hear more about it. And everything in between. Then there are ethical questions, medical ethical questions, and there are certainly ways to approach those questions that you always want to think about and then talk about with your interviewer of patient autonomy and the patient making the decision, thinking about making sure they're well informed so that they can make a decision. Is this going to benefit the patient, or is it going to hurt the patient or someone else? And usually, oftentimes, that is two sides of one coin, in that you can talk about ways in which it could benefit the patient versus ways in which it could hurt the patient. And then lastly, are there larger social ramifications? Is this something that is legal or not legal? Or even if it is legal, is the family informed? Are there other people who could be affected by this decision that you would want to have participate to the extent that it is appropriate and honoring the patient's autonomy? Are there others that you would want to involve in this? There are many, many, many critical analysis questions. And it's just like critical analysis, the questions that you got on the MCAT or that you've had in college. It's thinking about what are the things you know, what are the things you don't know, and understanding where that difference is, where the gray areas. Are you making assumptions about things? Are there questions you need to ask that would help inform your decision? And then, is there anything in your background that would help you think about how to approach this question and talk through this decision-making process with your interviewer? Don't just give the answer. They want to hear your thought process. Matt, do you have anything else you want to add before we jump in?
I think that we're okay just to jump right in, Maria. I think that you covered most of the questions.
Okay, Laura, would you like to ask Matt the first question?
I would love to. So Matt, thank you for coming to our interview today. I would really like to know, why do you want to become a doctor?
Well, thanks so much for having me here, Ms. Christensen. I really, loved having the opportunity to come here, and, being a doctor has been, something I've wanted to do my whole life. I think that, one of the most important things is I love helping people. I think that, I've done a lot of volunteering at a local hospital, and I really have a lot of good experiences, working one-on-one with, both doctors and nurses, and, certain patients that, have really told me that I've, done a great job at what I've done. And, I think it really kind of coincides with, where I want to, see myself in the future. And, I did pretty well in science in college, and, I think that kind of came easiest to me. So I think that it's definitely something I can see myself doing. And, again, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here. So before I throw this back over to Maria or Laura, okay, just to break character there for a second, just so everybody knows, we're going to give a lot of bad responses. Hopefully you guys, I was being a little bit good and sarcastic there and not doing as good a response as I could. Granted, it's been like a long time since I've interviewed. I told Maria and Laura I'm going to get murdered in these questions that they ask me. But the point of this live interaction is for you guys to see what to do and what not to do, right? So, I definitely want to hear Maria and Laura's feedback, but some of the things to look out for are no putting your hands in front of your mouth, okay? No tics, no shaking your leg or moving your hands around crazily, keeping yourself very relaxed. certainly having an articulate answer with less uhs and ums, trying to avoid cliches such as just helping people, but rather bringing in personal experiences that you have encountered and how you relate that to being a physician. But I'll turn it back over to the experts here to say what they thought. So Maria, why don't we start with you, and then Laura, you can jump in.
Thank you, Matt. The core substance of Matt's answer was absolutely spot on, in that the reason anyone should be going to medical school and want to be a doctor is because they like science and they want to help people. Fundamentally, if you don't resonate with both of those qualities, then medicine is not the profession for you. However, that just kind of made it a white bread kind of answer that he gave. So I would have wanted to hear a little bit more about Matt's background and history, just a sentence or two about where he came from, and then tie it to experiences, whether that was an individual, whether it was something that happened to him or someone he knew that first got him interested in medicine or in science, and then how it evolved, how his interest in medicine evolved, and how he tested his perceptions, tested what it was he thought that medicine was all about to confirm that this actually was a good fit for him. So I would have expected that his answer would have had flow, kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end, a conclusion, and that it would have lasted somewhere between 90 seconds to maybe 2.5 minutes in answering that question, to have done a really thorough job. Laura?
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, when Matt talked about the hands, that's a big deal. Covering your mouth when you're talking, it's not going to come over well. I am one of those people who talks with my hands a lot. Every once in a while, you can kind of see my fingers pop up on the screen. You want to practice keeping your hands more folded, whether they're in your lap if you don't have a desk in front of you, or neatly on the table in front of you. The the likes, some of those speaking tics that we often develop, that's a good time to practice your pausing. If you tend to end a sentence and then go before you start your next one, that's actually your brain trying to take a moment to think. Pause before you get to that point. So when you're doing some of your practice interviews, which is why you definitely need to practice, kind of keep track of your ums. Have the person keep track of how many times you're saying or like, or any of those other speech tics that you don't want to come across. And I just did it right there. That's when you want to practice the pause and break yourself of that habit. So those are definitely, it comes across more professional when you take that pause, gather your next thought, and then speak. I have been interested in becoming a doctor for a very long time. In fact, when I was a child, I had this issue that something happened to one of my family members, and my grandfather went through a really traumatic medical experience. Watching the doctors and nurses take care of him. You don't want to do that. You want to, watching the doctors and nurses take care of him really showed me what a caring and helpful profession this was to get into. And I started to plan my future for that. Those are the kinds of things you want to aim for. Maria.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Matt our next question, which is, please tell me why you want to come to our medical school.
Well, first, I just want to say how grateful I am to be here and be given this opportunity in the first place. Being able to interview at this institution was very important to me for three major reasons. First, I really love the small group formats that the curriculum is based upon. Back in college, the classes that I ended up loving the most were small group discussions where we were able to bring in an outside topic that we researched to help teach the subject kind of beyond what the actual instructor was doing, being able to work with our peers to learn the knowledge together. And I feel that's something that being a future physician working on a healthcare team that it's important to. Two, one of the things I love about the curriculum here is the actual independent ability to build a schedule. So, part of what my background in college focused on was not only being able to do things for a typical pre-med route, but I also had a minor in history and a minor in the Spanish language because those were very interesting to me. And, I think it's important throughout my medical training, which is very rigorous, to have those interests and to be able to balance my life effectively. And the same can be said as with a physician. And I think it's also, good that a physician might know a second language dealing with patients from many different cultures. So being able to build the curriculum around, not only the hardcore science stuff that's part of medical school, but also allowing time for those classes, courses, and activities that would suit my interests is something that your school can offer. And then finally, I really love the standardized patient encounters that start from day one. Basically, what I loved most about my volunteering experience throughout high school and college was getting in to see patients and being able to work with them. And that's where my love for medicine came from. And being able to get in that standardized patient encounter immediately and, learning about how to communicate well with, the patients that I'm becoming a doctor for means a lot to me, as does obviously the science to become a doctor. But I think that's something that sets this school apart from others that I'm applying to. And so those are kind of the main reasons why I would love to come here. So before I jump to Maria and Laura with that, so one of the things that I always teach my students about is trying to have a good, thought as to what your answer is going to be, not necessarily memorizing, but having at least 3 good points in your mind. So if Maria were to ask me, tell me about yourself, why you want to be a doctor, any question really, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I have 3 main points that I have to cover in my head. Now, some people may, do things differently, but that's always kind of helped me along keeping myself organized and not being a runaround nonstop sort of talking. But another thing, it's just a very subtle thing that you have to be mindful of, is trying to not only give specific experiences in your resume, which is a way for you to tell people, hey, I have experience in doing this, but 2, trying to connect what you say to being a physician. Right? So it's not just, hey, I've done this, thus I'm interested in this, but hey, this also is going to apply to me being a better physician. I've found that as a way to, help people really see me beyond just the, hey, why do you want to come here? Because the classes are cool and the people are cool, giving it a little bit more depth. Maria, what are your thoughts on that?
I thought you gave an excellent answer. And the reason for that is the question was, why do you want to come here? And the average answer would be to recite things out of the marketing material that the medical school puts out. You've got, rate this, rate that, rate something else. Instead, Matt did those things in that he took specifically why would that be important to him and gave me demonstrated evidence that those things are important to him. Consequently, as an interviewer, I am thinking, wow, he really knows about the school and we really are a good fit for him. And more importantly, from my perspective, he's a good fit for us because he gets us and why we think these things are important. Laura, do you have something to add?
I do, Matt, I do think you did a great job on that one. And that was definitely a thoughtful answer relating your personality to the school. That's something they're looking for. Why are you a person that is going to succeed at this school? They don't want to accept people who aren't going to do well. That's not going to benefit the school. So they're looking for people who have the characteristics that mesh with that particular program. So Matt did a great job at relating his learning style to that particular school. Now, there was a great question that came in. Thoughts about speaking with your hands. I do it very often throughout all of my conversations. I feel your pain. I do the same thing. I talk with my hands a lot. One thing to kind of practice clasping your hands together and keeping them down. If you are feeling the need to move your hands, keep them lower, below the chest area, below the thoracic area, more in the abdominal area. So that way it's not quite as pronounced. You don't run the risk of covering your face. There may be a point where something is like really exciting that you're talking about and you've got, this is awesome, that kind of stuff. Making sure your face is always visible is super important. So practicing interlacing your fingers, placing them on the table, placing them in your lap, keeping your hand gestures at a lower point on your body so they don't become distracting. And that's the big thing with talking with your hands. It can be very distracting for some people, and they tend to like see these hands and they can't pay attention to what you're saying and they're not absorbing that. So that would be the way I would practice that, and just throughout your everyday conversations, lace those fingers together, keep them low. Maria, would you like me to move on to the next question, or are you going to ask?
Go right ahead and feel free to take the next question.
All right. Matt, tell me about your research in college. You listed some of that on your resume, and I'd like to hear some more about that.
Absolutely. Research, I think, is a really important thing. It's something that I really want to do in medical school. I've looked up a lot of people online at this school, and I think that I can really work in their labs effectively. And I know that, publishing and, doing poster presentations are really important to getting into a good residency, and that research is very important to being a good physician, and it's something that all physicians, need to do. So I definitely want to continue it in medical school. When I was in college, I got involved in this research opportunity where basically I was helping screen some patients who had low back pain and being able to evaluate their scores. And, we found a way using, functional MRI to figure out, what areas of the brain can cause pain. And, it ended up being a, great thing. I didn't necessarily get a first author publication out of it, which, doesn't really look that well and, isn't that impressive. And, I'm sorry for that. But, I definitely plan to get involved in other projects in medical school and hopefully, get some first author papers and, really get my name out there. So that's my research experience. Okay, so before I jump back to Maria and Laura, so, one of the big things are, number one, relax. Okay, I felt like that was a, continuous run on, like I was just trying to throw stuff at it constantly. You have time. Remember, you're in a quiet room, you and the interviewer, relax. Everything is okay. They invited you here to interview. They think you're a sweet, awesome candidate. You're just explaining what is on your application. When they ask you a question, make sure to answer the question, as Maria has alluded to. I think I spent the first 30 seconds just talking about the word research and doing it in medical school without telling what I actually did. That Laura asked me, what did I do in college? I did not get to that until I was at least 30 seconds into the answer. If the interviewer asks for something specific, jump right into it and say, in college, I did this. This was my role. This is why it was important. This is what we found. These are the results. When it comes to things like padding the resume or making your resume look better, saying things like, I didn't get a first author publication, that's not the end of the, that's the end of the world. I promise to get more. You want to be very careful of saying something like that, because that makes the interviewer think that you think doing research is only to pad the resume and to make yourself look better, which is absolutely not the case. And you do not want to go into an interview or making the interviewer think you just did something to make your application look better. You want to sound like you actually loved what you were doing and you loved it for the right reasons, which I tell all my students that one of the biggest things is to relate it to patients. Bring it back to the patient. Why was your research important to medicine, to patients? How can you continue it in medical school if you plan to? And how is it going to improve the quality of care moving forward? These are just some of the things to think about. Maria, did you want to jump in?
I think you did an excellent job covering how your answer could have been better. So I have nothing to add. Laura?
I agree. I think you did a great job explaining that. I would emphasize too, don't apologize for something when you talk about it. If it's something you feel you need to apologize for, you probably don't want that in your answer. So think about that in terms of how you prep some of your answers. Maria.
I think we have time for one more question in terms of the mock interview questions before we open it up to the audience for questions. And so Matt, your last question of this evening in terms of an interview question is, you have a patient who has come to see you and you need to deliver the results that they have metastatic cancer. Please tell me how you would proceed.
Well, one of the most important things with providing bad news, such as metastatic cancer, is being able to be on the same level as the patient. Empathy is a word that I've certainly heard a lot about, something that makes a physician an ideal good physician. And it's something that I've witnessed in my volunteering in college. I've been able to shadow a few different physicians who have been able to deliver bad news, and some that I think I would replicate, and others that I think I might do a little differently. So some of my takeaways from my experiences were, one, to enter the room and make sure the room is a quiet, comfortable atmosphere for the patient. Two, making sure that I'm sitting eye level with the patient. And three, being honest. I think that one of the biggest things about being a good physician, what I want to be when I'm a physician, is one that is honest and always centered on the patient. So coming out and being able to say, that we have the results of the tests, and telling the patient, up front to prepare them, that these are the results. They may not be exactly what you wanted to hear, and then just going straight into the results. Hemming and hawing around before getting to the answer can sometimes, I feel, make the patient be more scared and anticipating the absolute worst, which I think being able to jump right into it and then being able to provide a level of comfort beyond just staying scientific would be something that I would try to do, rather than just focusing on what metastatic cancer is, but rather, number one, giving a pause to let it sink in and being very open with my emotions to be there for comfort, be there if the patient is angry, be there if the patient is in denial. That's something that I saw in my experiences in college, and it's things that I hope to replicate, which I don't think is easy. And I think that it will be a difficult task to master those facets of being a good physician, but it's something that I really hope to learn as a medical student here. So for that question, but before I jump over to Maria, I think that it's always a difficult question to put yourself in the mind of how do you interact with a patient. giving bad news, it's tough, even for me now, as a third-year radiology resident. It's never an easy thing, and it's hard to ever master it. It's something that, you are going to see, some people do it well, some people not do it so well. I think the most important thing that I'm just going to say is you always want to relate it to making sure the patient feels, comfortable, and, focusing away on, trying to play anything against, just saying it and, being, so super serious, but really just trying to, sit at eye level, be there for, like a good friend to the patient as well as the physician, really articulates a very deep, intimate relationship between the physician and patient. Trying to articulate that, I know it's difficult. It's even difficult for me now, but I think that's what really they're trying to get at there. Hopefully, or else Maria's going to say you're rejected, Matt. Let's see what she has to say.
Thank you very much, Matt. And before I add to what Matt has had to say, if you have a question that you'd like us to answer, now's the time to go ahead and put that into the chat box so that we can turn to any last questions that you all have before we wrap up tonight. So how Matt approached this question was right on. He used what is called the SPIKES protocol for giving bad news. And you can use this protocol whether you're talking about a patient that you have to deliver bad news to, or an employee that you have to fire. And that can be a question that comes up in an interview setting is, you're going to have to fire someone. How are you going to handle that? So what is the SPIKES protocol for delivering bad news? Well, each of the letters stands for the step in the process. S in SPIKES stands for the setting. And as Matt said, that he would choose a private, quiet setting, making sure that he doesn't have another appointment he has to run off to, that his phone calls are held, that he can focus on the patient and the patient can focus on him without having interruptions or distractions, which would be absolutely devastating, for someone to have, their doctor deliver bad news and then say, oh, wait a minute, I've got to take this phone call. That would not be good. The second letter, P, stands for perception. Find out what your patient's perception of the idea is. Is this going to come as a huge surprise to them, or do they already suspect the news that you're going to deliver? That can help inform you as to how you want to approach your delivery. So perception, what is their perception of why you are meeting? I stands for invitation. It's waiting for the patient to invite you to tell them the news. That might be subtle. It may be, saying, tell me everything. I want to know everything, versus not so much. They really would kind of like to just jump to, okay, and what does this mean in terms of treatment options? Because they just want to know the bottom line. They don't want to know all the details. Knowledge, you want to make sure that you are informing them to the extent that they want to hear at this moment, because you will have more opportunities to inform them of their condition. But in this moment, what do they want to know? And what is the information that you can convey in a way that they can understand? So you're not going to talk about metastatic cancer. You're going to talk about that their cancer has spread. You're not going to say the word biopsy. You're going to say a tissue sample. You're going to put it into plain English that your patient understands, unless, of course, you're talking to your patient happens to be a physician. But chances are they're not. They're someone who is a lay person, and you need to talk in lay terms. Empathy, empathizing that this, as Matt said, this is not what you wanted to hear. I totally understand That would not be what I would want to hear. And then lastly, the strategy and summarizing. So are you going to start talking about treatment options right away? That's totally going to be dependent upon your patient and what they want to talk about. Or do you want to schedule a meeting to come back to talk about those things maybe tomorrow after you've had a moment to digest this and share this information with whomever your patient feels it's appropriate for them to share this information with. And perhaps they would then want to invite somebody to join them the next day when you start talking about treatment options. So it's a format to help you keep your thoughts organized. And as I said, it applies really to any time you're delivering bad news to someone. And it's SPIKES, S-P-I-K-E-S, Protocol for Delivering Bad News. Laura, do you have something to add?
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, one thing I really want you to think about when Matt was giving his answer, the tone of his voice, his focus, his demeanor, it was the same type of tone that he would want to use as he's delivering that news. So not only did he answer the question properly, he had the body language and tone to match it. So keep in mind when you're answering a question like that, you're not going to be smiling as much or anything. You're going to be more serious. You need to change that demeanor to match the question. I'm going to have Maria talk real quick about inappropriate questions, things that you should not be asked during any interviews. And then we are going to jump to the questions that you have been sending us. Maria.
Oh, yes, my favorite topic. I would every year school my admissions committees on things they shall not ask. And you know, every year somebody did ask. So you should not get any questions that are legal in nature, such as legal, when I say legal, of a discriminatory nature. So no questions about your religion, no questions about your age, no questions about your sexual orientation, no questions about when and if, or maybe I should say if and when you plan to get married and or have children. You know, these are questions that are inappropriate, but they get asked. Oh, learning disabilities is another one. Some of you may know that it used to be noted on your MCAT scores if you had any type of an accommodation. It disappeared about 18 months ago. AMCAS no longer reports that information to schools because that information can be used inappropriately. So just because they're not supposed to ask doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And so if you have any reason to suspect that you might get asked a question because there is something on your application that might trigger a question, then I think you need to think ahead of time about how you're going to respond. You certainly can respond, that's none of your business, but it might not be the most appropriate way to respond, or the way that is going to get you the furthest. So give thought as to how you would respond, how much you want to self-divulge, and whether or not you want to report it at the end of the day. I don't have a perfect answer for you. Each person's situation is going to be different, and it's something that I work with all of my clients on. If there is something in their background that could be dicey, and we practice, because you don't want to be thrown off. You want to be able to handle those kinds of questions. So anybody else want to add anything before we jump into?
No, let's just jump right into the questions here. So there's just a few questions that came up here. Should tell me about yourself questions be about interests or about academics? I get that question a lot. It should be a good combination. I wouldn't want it to be just, hey, high school, college, here I am academic wise. I think it should be a little bit of both, giving kind of a good picture of yourself. And I'll just, since there's only 3 questions, I'll just kind of give my say and then I'll turn it over. If interviewing with an osteopathic med school, should you answer questions differently than with an allopathic program? Not really. I think that definitely you will get asked specifically about osteopathic medicine. That in and of itself will be a different question, and that will require a specific answer to it. And then when do we need to start practicing for the interview? Another great question. I think, most of my students like to wait to do the mock interview with me until they've actually gotten, some sort of interview, like at least, 3 or 4 weeks out, but totally variable. If you guys want to practice with us months out, it's totally fine. Maria, back to you.
Okay, let me just make sure that I can remember all of the questions that you just discussed. So the mix of academic information versus your hobbies, like Matt, I agree. It should be a mix of those two. They pretty much already know about your academics because they got to that in your MCAT application. Of course, they might also really feel like they have a good sense of your hobbies and if you listed them in your activities. But what they do want to know is that you're a real person and that you can talk about real things and that you have real interests. And so a good mixture, and certainly maybe talk about, if you're going to talk about academics and there's not something specific that needs further explanation, you might talk about some of your favorite classes that were outside of your major. There's lots of things that you can talk about that make you more interesting and that isn't already there in your application. In regards to the interviewing with osteopathic schools, I agree with Matt. I think you should absolutely be anticipating a question about why are you applying to osteopathic medicine, but I think it is not unlikely that you will be asked if you apply to allopathic schools. And again, you need to be prepared for how you're going to answer that question. I will tell you that because there is not a common application service for the 2 systems, with the exception of the private, there is no crossover between the 2 systems, that the allopathic schools don't know that you applied to osteopaths and the osteopathic schools don't know that you applied to allopaths. It would never occur to an allopathic school to think that you'd applied to osteopathic unless one of your letters of recommendations is osteopathic. On the other hand, with an osteopathic school, it's absolutely going to occur to them that you might have applied to allopathic schools. And they don't want to think that they are second choice. They want to think that and know that you are their first choice, that you want to become an osteopathic physician. So you need to think about how you would answer that question if you're planning to apply to both types of schools. Laura, I'm going to stop there and ask you if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, the one thing I really want to focus on, the tell me about yourself questions, interests, well-rounded. They, like Maria was saying, are you a real person who can talk about a variety of things? That's going to help establish a rapport, and that is how you establish relationships with other people. And then in terms of the interviewing with the osteopathic versus the allopathic, again, you want to research the schools you're going to be interviewing with, and you should be able to speak to the curriculum at that school, the types of things that you would be focusing on if you were to attend that school. And that's how you want to gear your answers. And that kind of goes along with, when do I need to start practicing interviews? Some people may want to wait until they have that acceptance, like Matt said, because maybe they want to prep for that specific school. Those are the kinds of things to think about. Now, in terms of how to prep, Kaplan has lots of options. And I'm going to ask Maria to move our slides to the one that talks about how you can actually book some time to talk with a Kaplan teacher. Those are just some of the options that we have in terms of admissions. But if you book time with a Kaplan teacher, they can go over each of these options with you and help you find the one that works best for you. So there's a link that's going to appear on the screen as Maria comes back on. And she's going to talk to you about what you can do with that link.
Thank you, Laura. For all of you, if at any point during your excuse me, your journey to medical school, actually, I've got a tickle. Matt, can you take over?
Yes, definitely. So we're here for all of you. You know, we at Kaplan want to make sure that we can provide you with whatever prep that you need, from MCAT to personal statements, to application, to mock interviews. This link at futuredoctor.youcanbook.me will provide you with a time slot that somebody from Kaplan will call you directly to discuss what package is best for you. And you know, whatever that you want to be able to work with, the three of us would love to work with each of you, whether it's mock interviews or anything else in the future. So start by going to this link, and we will take it from there. So with that said, we've run out of time for tonight. And so we definitely have enjoyed going through all this. We hope all of you have really enjoyed being here. We think this is a really important thing, and we love doing this. We love just, you know, helping all of you reach your success story. And so on behalf of the three of us and everybody at Kaplan, thanks again for attending. Best of luck on the medical school journey ahead, and we are here to help you. We hope to see you in the future. So thanks, everybody.